Okay, today is Tish'a BeAb in the year 5780, and we're going to deal with a topic that I think is something that's significant to a lot of people in terms of the type of people that we are and the way of life that we live in the year 2020, 5780, and so we're going to talk about how we find the right words to express our feelings about Yerushalayim and the situation that Yerushalayim is in, well, you'll see what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at two very significant Sephardic rabbis of recent times, and we're going to see how they approach a problem that I think that we all feel in one way, shape, or form. So let's go right into what the story is. So today is Tish'a BeAb, and I think we're all familiar with the fact that Tish'a BeAb commemorates the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash and the destruction of the city Jerusalem that was with it. Our Tifilot, if you pay even a little bit of attention, are very clear to be sad, depressing, to express sorrow and remorse and regret over all the terrible things that happened to the city of Jerusalem, in the city of Jerusalem, and our focus is on that destroyed city and the tragedy that has happened to the Jewish people over so many centuries. And that's the general tone of the day, and everyone is very familiar with the tone of the day being a day of mourning. There's a particular Tifila that we state, or that we say in our prayers, and there's actually a discussion about when we should say it, whether or not we should say it in every Tifila that we say, or is it simply in the Tifilot that we say for Mincha. But whatever the concern is, whatever the situation is, this is the Tifila that we say. It's called Tifilat Nachem. It's inserted in the Amidah, in the Shema Kolenu Tifila. You might be familiar with it. Again, we say it. Our custom in the Syrian community is generally to say it just for Mincha, and that's the custom of Ashkenazim as well. But most other Sephardim say it in all the Tefillah. Regardless, let's look at the words of the Tefillah, and we're going to examine this relatively quickly, identify a problem, and then try and deal with the problem. The problem said that the Tefillah reads as follows, and I have it in Hebrew and in English: Nachem Adonai Eloheinu et avele Tzion ve'et avele Yerushalayim ve'et ha'ir ha'chareva va'bezuya va'shomema. So it says, comfort or console Hashem our God at the mourners of Zion and the mourners of Jerusalem and the city that is destroyed and disgraced and shamed and empty. Mibli baneha yoshevet, without her children she sits. Verosha chafui ki isha akara shelo yalada, and she sits with her head covered like a barren, childless woman. Legions have devoured her. And they took your nation to the sword. They killed intentionally the saintly, righteous people. And therefore Zion is in bitterness, in rebellion, crying. Yerushalayim titen kola, and Jerusalem lets her voice out. Libi al halehem, my heart over the corpses that were piled up in the destruction of Jerusalem. Me'ai al harugehem, my insides, my internal parts of me are feeling about the dead. Ki ata Adonai ba'esh hetzata, you with fire have burnt it. Uba'esh ata tidivnota, and with fire you will one day rebuild it. As it says, I will be for you a wall of fire around, and I will be I will be through fire. I will save Jerusalem or rebuild Jerusalem. So the question that you might come up, I think that does come up for many of us, is as we read this Tefillah, is this the right Tefillah for us to be saying today? Because the words of the Tefillah describe Jerusalem as a city that is, I'll use the English translation that I have on the screen here: sorrow, laid waste, scorned, desolate, and so on. A destroyed city of Jerusalem. And the difficulty that many of us have, and any of us that are paying attention should have, is how do we say these words when the city of Jerusalem today doesn't exactly fit this description? And I want to go over this and see how it was, see how it's addressed. So what do I mean by that? All right. So let's look. We are all aware and all very happy about what happened in 1967, as embodied by the image on your screen right now, where the paratroopers came and took the old city, which was in the hands of Jordan, and basically put, for the first time in many, many years, the old city of Jerusalem under the sovereignty of the Jewish people. And it's not just a question of we recapture the Kotel. As everyone knows, once they recaptured it, they turned it into a place of prayer, a place that I'd bet everyone on here has visited at least once or twice, and probably many of us many, many more times than once or twice. And it's a place that, to be perfectly honest, we celebrate, we bring our celebrations there. We're happy to have that. And it's a significant thing that we have this Kotel. But it's not just the Kotel, because as we said, the city of Jerusalem also is being mourned as destroyed. But it's kind of hard to look at the city of Jerusalem and say that it's destroyed, right? One takes one look at this picture and says, hey, wait a second. It's a big, beautiful, thriving city. And if you look carefully in the pictures, you see that there's a tremendous amount of construction going on at all times. If anything, it's a city being built at all times. Just look at this picture, which is just a random picture that I took off the internet, and you can count no less than 8 different construction cranes building various different things in Jerusalem. And certainly, I think we can all say that if we visit Jerusalem less than frequently, and when I say less than frequently, I'm going to say less than once a year, right? One of the things that's interesting and intriguing about the city of Jerusalem is every time you come back to it, something new pops up. There's some new big building, some new mall, or something that happened. And Jerusalem is not just a city that's constantly being rebuilt. It's a city that's honestly very high tech. There's a whole Silicon Alley pictured in that upper left-hand picture. Even the old city, they managed to do all sorts of spectacular light shows. The light rail is a modern marvel. Even as you come into the city, you see that tremendous bridge, which I'm not sure what purpose it serves, right? But it's a Calatrava, building, which tells you Jerusalem's cutting edge. It's amazing. And recently, of course, we know that the United States and lots of other countries have started to recognize completely our sovereignty and hopefully our eternal sovereignty over the city. So there's no question that Jerusalem in the year 2020 is very different than the Jerusalem that was in the year 1966 and the year 1943 and the year 1843 and so on and so forth, and certainly going further back than that. And the question then begs an answer is, do we look at our Tifila and say, hey, does this work for us or not? And this is a question that we're going to look at 2 modern, recent rabbis who grappled with this question, and we're going to see how they approached it. So on the first group, we're going to look at 2 different people. It's interesting; they both actually serve the same position. The picture on the right is Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. It's a younger picture of him, and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was the chief rabbi, of course, of Israel. We're all familiar with that and some of the other roles that he played. But before being the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was also the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and which was a big position at the time. It was a precursor to him being the chief rabbi of Israel, and already at that time he was very widely known, that's really where he was at the time of the Six-Day War. At the time of the Six-Day War, he was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. The other person in the picture, maybe a little less well known, but still someone that's very significant and very important, is the person on the other side of the page here, Rabbi Chaim David Halevi. And actually, he succeeded Rabbi Ovadia Yosef as the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, and he served there for many, many years after. And actually, since then, there hasn't been a chief rabbi of Tel Aviv officially acknowledged. These are two really fantastic, tremendous Sephardic scholars of recent times. And as I said, they both were presented with this question because they lived in contemporary times. People came to them and said, rabbis, what do we do here? This Tifila says Jerusalem is destroyed and Jerusalem is in the hands of our enemies, but that's no longer the case. So what do we make of that? What do we do with that? And so we're going to look at how they approached it. Okay, so that's our topic for today. That's the background. Now we're going to look at how they actually, each one dealt with the issue. So let's go to the next slide here. So we're going to start with Rabbi Chaim David Halevi. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, again, looked at this Tifila, the Tifilat Nachem, and he said, you know, I don't know how this works. And so I'm going to read for you from an English translation, actually, but I'll read some of it in Hebrew, what he had to say. So Rabbi Chaim David Halevi has a very interesting and important work called Aseh Lecha Rav. Aseh Lecha Rav means literally, it's a quote from Pirkei Avot. It means literally make for yourself a rabbi or make yourself into a rabbi. And actually, it's an interesting beginning to his book, or an interesting origin to his book. It actually didn't start as a book. It started, and this can only be in the 20th century, it started as a radio show. He had a call-in show, and people would call in and give him questions, and he would answer them. The question that was posed for him was the following. After the IDF has conquered Jerusalem and huge crowds of Jews fill the Kotel Plaza with celebration, can it really be that in the Nachem Tefillah on Tish'a BeAb at Mincha, we should say about Jerusalem that it is a city in mourning, desolate and disgraced without her children, right? So that's the question that was posed to him on a radio show, and he ultimately turned it into a book, which you can find. There are copies floating around, and it's Unit 1, Book 1, Item 14, and he says as follows. He says, in this matter, you are correct. On the first Tish'a BeAv after the Six-Day War, I also felt that I could no longer say in my prayer these words, for doing so would fall in the category of speaking falsehoods before God. And here I'm just going to use the Hebrew term, but he calls it dover shekarim lifnei Hashem, speaking lies, or speaking falsehoods before Hashem. It's not only that every day of the year, and especially on holidays, including the 5th and 28th of Iyar, that's Yom HaTzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, that Jerusalem is teeming with celebration, thousands upon thousands of the children of our nation coming to Jerusalem in its celebration, crowned with happiness and joy, putting a sense of national pride in the heart of every person of Israel. He says, so that's an important thing to point out. He says, but not only that, right? So 1 second. He says, but before, he says, even on Tish'a BeAv, the national day of mourning, when so many Jews come to the Kotel, wrapped in mourning over the destruction of the temple, even then, there's a certain corner of my heart where the mourning just can't reach, a place of joy for the first flowering of our redemption. So he says as follows. He says, the same Kotel, which was known as the Wall of Tears, where the Shekhinah of Hashem was exiled for all those days, even after the destruction, and was dressed in garments of blackness and darkness. He's quoting from the Zohar. In those days, when a Jew reached that place before 1967, he was immediately moved to tears over the exile of the Shekhinah before 1967. He says, but now, when someone comes there, even on Tish'a BeAv, they can't but feel some internal happiness when they see so many Jews filling the temple courtyard. And is even likely that the Shekhinah of God is no longer dressed in garments of blackness and darkness in the presence of the whole Jerusalem, complete and united under Jewish rule. He says, therefore, to say that Jerusalem is destroyed and disgraced, desolate without her children, is doubtless an issue of speaking falsehoods before God. So he really has issues with this. He says, even on Tish'a BeAv, which is interesting. It's easy to say on Yom Yerushalayim, or one of the great moments that I think some of us have experienced and seen is to go to the Kotel at a special time. To go to the Kotel, if you're there on, let's say the first day of Chol HaMoed of Sukkot, where you have literally tens of thousands, or to go there during Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, where they're reciting Selichot, and there could be 100,000 people there. To go and be there, another different type of experience, but a very powerful one. To be there when a group of soldiers, Tzanchanim, are being sworn in at the Kotel. When you're at the Kotel, you can't help but feel an internal joy and happiness. And as a result, he says, it's very difficult for him to say the Tifila as is written. That's the Rabbi Chaim David Halevi's expression. So what does he do with this? So Rabbi Chaim David Halevi says, okay, so I feel it. I hear you. I hear the problem, and here's here's how I've answered it. So he says, Misiba zot, for this reason, Nahagti anochi, he says, my custom that I did is lohosif mila achat bilvad. He said, I added one word, right? And ulishanot mila achat benusach nachem, to change one word. He says, in order to stay away from telling a lie. And he says as follows. What is that? What do I say? He says, I say, Nachem Adonai Eloheinu et avelei Tzion v'et avelei Yerushalayim. Right, you can see it on there. Ve'et ha'ir shehayeta hachareva v'bezuya. The city that was destroyed and disgraced, and so on. He says, and when I say the word shehayeta, that it was, and he obviously has changed the meaning of the Tifila very substantially to say that it no longer is in that situation. This is a big change, even though it's only one word, right? And this is what Rabbi Chaim David Halevi said, and a number of people have picked up upon since then. But he basically says, what we've been talking about until now is the problem is a problem, and the solution to the problem is to very slightly, amend the Tifila by adding one word in, which expresses it allows the prayer, the one who's praying, to express that he still mourns many aspects of what happened, but that he also recognizes that Jerusalem is no longer destroyed and it's no longer without her children being there. So that's what Rabbi Chaim David Halevi had to say. So great, fantastic, interesting. Now I want to look at what Rabbi Ovadia Yosef had to say, because he had a very, very different approach to it, although he definitely addresses the question. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef wrote a very famous work, also Shelot and Tshuvot, called Yachaveh Da'at. And as I said, he was also the chief rabbi of Israel, and what's interesting, the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. What's interesting is his book Yachaveh Da'at, I only found out recently, also started as a radio show. So there's a lot of parallel between these two great rabbis, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and Chaim David Halevi. And so what we're going to do is, his Teshuvah is a little bit longer, and I don't have it translated into English, so I'm just going to make the basic points that he makes in his Teshuvah, in his answer. So he says, first of all, first thing you have to know is that all the tefillot that we have, all the tefillah and the beracha that we have, were established by the men of the great assembly, the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, and that's a very significant thing. And he says, and not only that, he says, we know that they knew that the Beit HaMikdash was going to be destroyed. Even though they lived after the rebuilding of the first Beit HaMikdash, they knew that the second Mikdash was going to be destroyed as well, and they knew about the first Mikdash that was destroyed. He says, and therefore we make the assumption that the Tefillah of Nachem, the Tefillah that we say, was established by Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And that is a very, very significant point for him, because he says, once you say that the Tefillah was established by the greats of the greats, he says, who are we to change it? We don't have the right to change the Tefillah that was established by Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. And he feels very, very strongly about that. I want to point out that in my research for this class, I also spent some time looking at what Ashkenazi rabbis said, and almost to a person, most of the Ashkenazi rabbis, even some of the most Zionistic ones, also kind of took this approach of saying, who are we to change the Tifila? And in that sense, Rabbi Chaim David Halevi was more in the minority opinion on this. Not to say that no one else agreed with him, but certainly if you count just sheer numbers, he's more in the minority opinion. And even I'm forgetting the first name of Rav Kook, not the original Rav Kook, but his son Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who's the head of Merkaz, who was the founder of Merkaz Harav. Rabbi Soloveitchik agreed along the lines of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. But we're here to talk about Sephardic rabbis, so I'm really just going to stick with them. This is a shout out to the SCA. Whenever I give a class, if I don't quote some Sephardic rabbi, they say I'm not being traditional enough. So my response to them has always been, aren't I Sephardic? Doesn't that count? But it doesn't work. Bobby wants more than that. So Bobby, there you are, with the shout out to Sephardim. Okay, now he says further than that, he quotes the Chida. He says the Chida, who was Chaim Yosef David Azulai, one of the great rabbis in the I want to say the 1800s, said. He had a very Kabbalistic bent. And he said, not only were these tefillot established by Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, he says the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah had within them certain Kabbalistic thinking, and that every word and every sentence and every letter and every order of every piece of the tefillah all have special, what we might call powers, what they call kavanot, directing certain things towards Shamayim, and we can't touch it, So the Chida, very strong to say you can't touch anything.
Hello.
Yes, you're here. Someone's speaking. If you don't mind muting yourself. He says, therefore, we don't have the ability to change the tefillah of Nachem. And he says, not only that, he added a very significant, that significant piece was to say, sorry, one second. That significant piece was to say that today the Bet HaMikdash is still not built. It's still, if you look at the Bet HaMikdash, or where it used to be, there's a golden dome there. It's in the hands of the Arabs, and we can't enter there. He says, and not only that, if you look at the old city, the Jewish quarter is really the smallest quarter of the city. And in fact, more than half the city is filled with churches, which most Sephardic rabbis consider to be Avodah Zarah. So the old city of Jerusalem is filled with Avodah Zarah. Further, he says that if you look around at the city of Jerusalem, old and new, you see that there's a great amount of people that simply don't keep the Torah and the mitzvot. And he particularly focuses on the fact that there are thousands, tens of thousands of Jewish students in Israel that go to schools that basically teach no Torah, no mitzvot, and in fact, teach them kind of to stay away from the Torah and the mitzvot. He says, and further than that, he says, you look at Jerusalem and you see that it is missing great levels of tzniut and ethics. And for all of these reasons, says Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, there's still a lot to mourn on the day of Tish'a B'Av, and it's not our place, and nor should we change the tefillah, and we should use the exact and original Nachem tefillah that we had all along. So basically where we end up is that you have these two great Sephardic rabbis, Rabbi Chaim David Halevi and Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and they're basically balancing two very significant issues. Issue number one is the need for integrity and truth in what we say and in how we feel, and the need to recognize the great hand of Hashem that we have seen in our time. We have something that generations of Jews could only dream of. Jerusalem in our hands, and not only in our hands, but we've been blessed because we have it in our hands to rebuild it into levels that in many ways it never was before, certainly in terms of population size, in terms of actual size of the city, in terms of it being a cutting leading edge city. It's amazing. It's fantastic. And who amongst us doesn't appreciate Yerushalayim? Not a one. And it doesn't matter where you are on the religious spectrum, Yerushalayim is a wonder and a blessing, and we all feel that way. But what does that mean in terms of how I express my words in Tifila? So Rabbi Chaim David Halevi says the driving force is his integrity. He's most concerned about Dover Shekarim Hashem. I don't want to say the wrong words. I don't want to take the beracha that Hashem gave me, and I don't want to say about that Tifila. I don't want to say words that negate how I really feel. And that's his driving principle. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, who recognizes that principle, he doesn't make small of it, and that's why he spends the time dealing with the issue, says that it's an important issue. He says, but I'm not there yet, and we're not there yet. And the tefillot, which are established by great rabbis, maybe even prophets, says those tefillot are endowed with special powers and special abilities, and we can't touch that. And our, if there's another truth that's very valuable, and that's the truth of the tradition. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, like many others, says, don't touch it, leave it. There's still plenty that's not all the way there. There's plenty that's not right. And therefore, it's appropriate to have words that mourn Yerushalayim and talk about Jerusalem as destroyed even today. It's interesting, what I want to be clear that I'm doing is not picking a side, because this is not about picking a side. This is about simply seeing how our rabbis work. And I think what's important to see is that both rabbis, who are embodying really all of our rabbis, do a number of things here. So first of all, they listen to the people. They neither of them dismiss offhand the question. When someone comes, they don't say, you're crazy, right? They say, wow, that's a great question, right? And they don't just pay lip service to it. They really spend the time thinking about it and working it and putting their name behind it. And you have to realize that both rabbis had to take a stand here. And when a rabbi takes a stand, it's not simple. It means someone's going to say, Rabbi, you don't know what you're talking about, on either side, right? Whichever way that it's going to be. And both of the rabbis had the courage to take a stand. In the end, they choose differently. They have different motivating factors, and who's to say which one is more right or wrong? Certainly not me. I would not deign to make that guess. Both rabbis, in terms of knowledge and also what they've contributed to Am Yisrael, are I won't even say head and shoulders above me. They're so way beyond me that I could not weigh in on that issue and would not weigh in on that issue. And I think so please don't misquote me as saying something here. But I think it's great to see that these are our rabbis, and that this is the way that they work, and that they take the concept of truth and the concept of tradition very, very seriously, and they put forward some amazing Torah and give us a lot to think about. So whether we follow the path of Rabbi Chaim David Halevi or we follow the path of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, I think that we recognize that we have an amazing tradition that we're part of. And as we're mourning the city of Jerusalem today, in whatever way that we're mourning it, we know that it's not just about the stones, it's about the heart that's in the stones, as the poem goes, and that's a very special place. Anyway, that's where I'm going to stop. Even though I hit my limit in time, I thought I was going to end a few minutes earlier. I'll try and take a couple of questions. I hope no one minds if I do that on the SEAN. Feel free to cut me off if I need to. Any questions, feel free to unmute yourself. I'm happy to answer.
Rabbi, good to see you.
Nathan, great to see you.
Good to see you. Hopefully we will be back in the shul.
Amen. I did my best with the virtual background here today, but
having a good summer?
Baruch Hashem.
Good.
Baruch Hashem.
Sorry to...
No problem. Any questions? Any questions?
No, Rabbi, great, interesting. I'm trying to listen to it at work. I miss your
Rabbi,
face,
what do
Rabbi.
you say, Rabbi? What do you say?
I miss everybody.
What do I say? I have, I'm gonna stop the recording and then I'll say what I say because you're gonna laugh at me as I say it. But
Come on.